Welcome, friends, and let me spin a tale of obsession, danger, and an unlikely heroine whose quiet courage saved the day when jealousy turned utterly venomous. Enjoy the story. Nancy Wilkins was hissing directly in Lisa Stewart's face, her eyes wild with rage. Lisa remained calm and composed, refusing to be intimidated. "You little home-wrecking tramp," Nancy spat. "I know you're trying to take my man Greg away from me." Lisa sighed deeply. "Nancy, for the last time, my relationship with Greg is between the two of us. It's none of your business." "Don't play dumb with me," Nancy's voice rose to a shrill screech. "Greg is mine. He'll leave your desperate, clingy ass soon enough when he realizes what a pathetic mistake he's made." Lisa simply shook her head. "Believe what you want, Nancy. But Greg loves me, and there's nothing you can do about it." With a guttural growl of frustration, Nancy stomped away, knocking over a potted plant in her wake. Lisa exhaled slowly, wondering just how far Nancy's obsession might go. Unable to take Nancy's relentless harassment any longer, Lisa abruptly left the office. She rushed down the hallway, nearly bowling over elderly janitor Mrs. Beatrice Wilson. "Oh, excuse me, dear," Mrs. Wilson said, steadying herself. One look at Lisa's reddened eyes and trembling lips told Mrs. Wilson something was very wrong. "Come on now, honey, let's have a nice chat." She ushered Lisa into the janitor's closet and closed the door. Lisa immediately burst into tears, the floodgates opening. Mrs. Wilson patted her back soothingly. There, let it all out. Whatever's got you this upset can't be good." After a few minutes, Lisa regained her composure enough to explain about Nancy's unhinged behavior and accusations. Mrs. Wilson clucked her tongue disapprovingly. "That Nancy girl ain't got no heart. Always been a selfish piece of work," she said frankly. "Mark my words, she'd do just about anything if she thinks it'll get her what she wants." Lisa's eyes widened. "You mean, you think she might actually try to hurt me? Over Greg?" Mrs. Wilson nodded solemnly. "I wouldn't put it past her, the way she was carrying on over him before you two got together. She don't take no for an answer too well." She patted Lisa's hand. "You just watch your backside around that spiteful one, you hear? Some folks'll go to ugly lengths over jealousy." The door to Greg Edwards' office flew open as Nancy barged in unannounced. Greg looked up in exasperation from his desk. "Nancy, what's going on? You can't just—" "Do I need your permission to come see you now?" Nancy sneered. "Is that how it is, Greg? You're so wrapped around that little tramp's finger you can't even talk to me?" Greg rose to his feet, his expression hardening. "That's enough. We agreed when our fling ended that it was over for good. I'm with Lisa now, and you need to respect that." "Respect?" Nancy laughed derisively. "I'll get the respect I deserve when you realize your mistake and come back to me like you were always supposed to." "That's not happening," Greg stated firmly. "And if you keep harassing Lisa, I'll fire you. Are we clear?" Nancy's eyes narrowed to slits as she glared at him furiously. "Crystal," she hissed, before turning on her heel and storming out, slamming the door behind her hard enough to rattle the frosted glass panes. Greg rubbed his bleary eyes as he worked late into the night. His lack of sleep was haunted by bizarre, troubled dreams of menacing snakes slithering all around him. He shook his head, trying to dislodge the lingering nightmares. The next morning was comically disastrous from the very start. First, the coffee maker decided to spurt and wheeze without producing a single drop of the life-giving caffeine Greg craved. Then, when he tried to make tea instead, he realized he was out of tea bags. As Greg hurriedly got ready, he ripped the pocket of his favorite suit jacket, snagging it on a kitchen drawer pull. Cursing under his breath, he shrugged into the damaged coat and rushed out the door, only to stumble and send his white ceramic travel mug shattering to the ground, splattering coffee everywhere. "Terrific, just terrific," Greg muttered, surveying the mess. He grabbed some paper towels and frantically tried to mop up the mess before more stains set in. By the time he made it to the office, he was frazzled, disheveled, and in desperate need of a second cup of coffee. Greg arrived at the office earlier than most employees, seeking a few quiet moments to collect himself before the workday began. As he sipped from his fresh mug of coffee, He idly wondered what sort of mischief might be caught on the security camera footage from the night before. He'd never actually reviewed any of the recordings, but perhaps it would prove an amusing glimpse into the office antics after hours. Greg logged into the security system and pulled up the video feeds from the previous night, fast-forwarding through the empty hallways and darkened offices. What he saw next nearly caused him to do a spit take with his coffee. There was Mrs. Wilson, the kindly old janitor, clearly pilfering one of the office computers. She carefully unplugged it and wrapped it up before heading towards the back exit with it tucked under her arm. Greg's jaw dropped in disbelief. Sweet old Mrs. Wilson, a thief? He immediately dialed building security to report the shocking footage. As the morning employees began trickling in, Greg loudly announced that they had an urgent situation. I'm sorry to have to do this, but I've discovered one of our own has been stealing from the company, he proclaimed grimly. Mrs. Wilson, I have video evidence of you taking Lisa's computer last night and attempting to remove it from the premises. A hush fell over the assembled staff as all eyes turned towards the elderly janitor. Mrs. Wilson showed no signs of surprise, shame, or fear. She simply nodded calmly. That's correct, Mr. Edwards. I did take that computer, but I think you'll want to hear my explanation before you involve the authorities, she said evenly. If you'd follow me outside, please. Bewildered and deeply unsettled, Greg had no choice but to comply, trailing behind Mrs. Wilson as she headed out the back exit into the alleyway. Scene 7. The snake behind the building. Mrs. Wilson gestured to a large, lumpy collection of plastic bags near the dumpster. She carefully retrieved a metal rod from her janitorial cart and used it to gingerly open the top bag. To Greg's absolute horror, the bags were concealing Lisa's stolen computer, with a large, vividly patterned snake coiled around it. The serpent flicked its black, forked tongue menacingly as Greg recoiled. Sweet mercy, he gasped. Mrs. Wilson, what in God's name is going on? The old woman's expression was grim. I saw that Nancy girl tampering with Miss Lisa's computer after hours a few nights ago. When I checked it out, I found she'd had this snake shipped to the office and stashed inside, vents cut so it could come slithering out at the right time. She shook her head sadly. Lord knows what kind of hurt that twisted girl meant to inflict, but I couldn't take the chance of that poor creature attacking Miss Lisa on her account. Greg felt nauseous realizing just how far Nancy's jealousy and obsession had gone. Mrs. Wilson had quite literally saved Lisa's life. When Greg marched Nancy into the office conference room to confront her with Mrs. Wilson's evidence, she flew into an utterly unhinged meltdown. You were never supposed to find out, Nancy shrieked, makeup running in streaked rivers down her blotchy face. Lisa deserved it. She took what was rightfully mine. Nancy lunged towards Lisa with hands outstretched like claws, but Greg quickly restrained her. You're insane. Lisa is the victim here, not you. Let me go. Nancy flailed and thrashed against Greg's grip. I'll kill her. I swear to God, I'll kill the little... 2 security guards had to be called in to forcibly remove the hysterical Nancy from the premises. She screeched obscenities and hurled any object she could get her hands on as they dragged her away. In the aftermath, Greg could hardly find the words to express his gratitude towards Mrs. Wilson's heroic actions. If she hadn't taken it upon herself to secretly remove the deadly serpent before anyone was harmed, the consequences could have been unthinkably tragic. I don't know how we can ever repay you for your bravery, Mrs. Wilson, he said, voice thick with emotion as he took the old woman's hands. You saved Lisa's life. Lisa embraced Mrs. Wilson tightly, tears swimming in her eyes. Bea, you're our angel. What you did, I can't thank you enough. Mrs. Wilson waved off the praise with a humble smile. Now, none of that. I just did what any decent soul ought to. But, her eyes twinkled, I wouldn't say no to being a guest of honor at your upcoming wedding, if you catch my drift. Greg and Lisa exchanged a glance and laughed through the remaining shock and relief. Consider it done, Mrs. Wilson, we insist. As police led the still ranting Nancy away in handcuffs, Lisa looped her arm through Greg's and rested her head on his shoulder. Her harrowing ordeal was finally over, and she had a most unlikely heroine to thank for her safety and her future.